Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia, and with me is the very thoughtful Jennifer Woolman. And guys, you might not be able to see this
if you're
through
listening.
the audio, but Jennifer was in Switzerland and brought me some very special dark chocolate wafers and these chocolate spoons for my coffee. Oh my God, I love it. It's so decadent. It's so delicious, and you're always so thoughtful every time you travel. So
Come
I
on, dark
appreciate
chocolate is our thing.
It's
one of our things.
Find you a partner like my partner, okay? That's all I gotta say. Life goals. All right. So speaking about travel, I know you were visiting family. Obviously, brings us to the topic of tourism, and there's so much going on in South Florida right now, and a lot of things that are coming up. We're just on the other side of the Formula One race, which for the fifth year in a row was sold out.
Yeah.
It is one of the top Formula One races in the entire schedule, and it is one of the newest races in the Formula One schedule, which is, just unbelievable. And you could tell that there's just a lot of excitement. We got the World Cup, coming on. And you and I always like to dive into the data that Visit Florida provides.
Correct.
And I know that we're doing this at a time where not all the reports are out yet.
But we do have a lot of information from 2025. They just haven't compiled the entire report. But the numbers are fascinating. And it was interesting because we actually landed back at MIA on Saturday, What was Saturday?
2nd?
May 2nd. Yes, thank you. Saturday, May 2nd. And it was crazy. I mean, crazy, because Formula One was going on. There was a huge soccer match at the new stadium right there. I forget the name of it. I'll think of it in a minute. But where Inter Miami was playing.
Yeah.
New.
Yeah, New. That's right. It is called New. That's why I always think that's a strange name. But the new stadium. There was a major golf tournament going on. There was just so much activity, and the airport was packed. It took me almost 30 minutes to get an Uber with surge pricing and everything. And, as a traveler, that was a bit frustrating. I do think we need to continue working on our infrastructure as we have been, because again, coming from Europe where travel is so seamless. I mean, between the trains and the buses and the trams, everything just flows a lot more smoothly. And especially now with the new stadium there is a bit of a bottleneck, right, with traffic and everything else. So I think we need to work that out, but that's a good problem to have. So instead of getting frustrated, I was very excited because I knew there were so many of these great events going on all at one time, and you could feel the excitement and the activity and the energy that was in Miami at the time. So that we arrived. So again, I'm so grateful that I live in a place that I love coming home to. I know a lot of people who are very sad leaving where they vacation, but the other thing is just, and we talk about this all the time, how easy it was to get to go see my family. It was a short 9-hour flight, super easy in and out, and with so many different options of flights and prices and nonstop versus layovers, et cetera. Sure. So why don't we dive in?
By the way, guys, I don't know exactly how Jennifer spent all of her vacation, but she was staying in a place where outside of her balcony, she could see the Lindt chocolate factory, and she would describe to me the smells that were kind of coming out of the factory. So I know that you're like that memory I have of, when you go by a bakery early in the morning and they're baking bread. So I know that you were sitting outside with your coffee and smelling the chocolate.
Yes, and it was, I like that you said a bakery because it wasn't like, I remember when the Wholesome factory was here and it was a very, very strong bread smell.
Correct.
This was not an overpowering, sickly, sweet smell. It was just something that occasionally would drift, like a little reminder that it's chocolate time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we were discussing is that even though the numbers are preliminary, in 2024, Florida had a record-breaking 142.9 million visitors. It looks like, based on the preliminary numbers, in 25, that's going to push even higher to about 143.3 million visitors, which again is going to move up all the other numbers that we're going to discuss. And it really bodes well for, I think some of this was slow to come back after the pandemic. And now we're seeing that the trend is back to where it had been prior to it.
Correct. And I think it's interesting because they break it down by domestic visitors, overseas visitors, and then Canada has their own separate, because it's such a big market for us, separate category. And we did see a big, almost a 15% decline in growth from Canadian visitors, given everything that's going on politically. But we are still seeing Canadian buyers and sellers in our market coming into our market. So
and I was just in Orlando and someone had told me about the amount of they do a lot of business with Canadian visitors, and they're very optimistic that the Canadians are going to come back. So really, really interesting. I also find it interesting that you have a 15% decline in a demographic that was so present and vital to those numbers, and you still had an increase.
Correct.
With that decline, which says a lot about how the trend is going to continue to grow. And then, of course, tourism, it's not just about the hotels, but every visitor creates demand for retail, restaurants, entertainment venues, industrial and logistics, because, you got to feed people, you got to take care of people, multifamily housing for workers, airport and transportation infrastructure, which you were just alluding to. And so there's a huge tie-in to commercial real estate when you're looking at these tourism numbers. And you're looking at the macroeconomy, overall. And
interestingly, even though the number of Canadian visitors dropped, they were still the highest percentage of total international visitors at 23, almost at 24%. So that just shows, if they do bounce back in 2026, or when they do bounce back, it's a significant change. Other big...
well, it also speaks to when the full report comes out, to evaluate how much of an increase in domestic, visitors we've had, which has been really, really powerful.
Yeah, and even that, the year-over-year change of domestic visitors from North America was minus 12%. That includes Canada, obviously North America, Canada, U.S., and Mexico, right? So yeah, but that still accounted for 28.8% of our total visitors, and followed by South America. South America bounced back. It took them longer to bounce back after the pandemic, but they've bounced back. And leading that are Brazil, which, Brazilians count for approximately 11%, 10.7% of our international visitors. And then Argentina also had a huge jump. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with our soccer promotion here. Soccer is so huge in Argentina. Spain had a big jump of 10%. And so did Italy and Costa Rica, and 20% jump in Guatemala.
Pura vida. Oh, wow. That's pretty awesome.
Costa Rica, yeah.
I love it, and there are a lot of people that are building business. So there's a broker in Tampa. Her name is Karina, who is, from Brazil. She speaks Portuguese, and she does all of her marketing and videos in Portuguese for the Brazilian consumer. And there's been a huge growth of the Brazilian consumer in that Tampa Bay area. So, it really is interesting how all these things have a tie-in. And of course, when you have all these visitors, you have out-of-state visitors spend approximately $135 billion in Florida in 24. That number in 25, it's likely to be higher just based on the fact that we have more visitors.
Correct. And just two regions that don't get a lot of notice in our area are Asia-Oceania, and they had a big year-over-year change. That was an 11% increase, and the Middle East and Africa had 11% increase. Even though they're a smaller percentage, Asia-Oceania is 4.2% of our total international visitors, and Middle East Africa is 2.1%. Yeah. The fact that they jumped so rapidly, and we've seen this a lot with Miami realtors and a lot of the traveling that we do, when you start seeing these significant year-over-year changes in visitors, eventually they become a larger percentage of the total, and a lot of them start buying and investing in Florida.
Yeah, and there's always been conversations that if you have more direct flights from Asia to Miami directly, that you're going to see a huge increase in those percentages.
Correct.
So, really, really, really interesting. And then, a lot of people don't connect tourism with industrial demand. But, think about it. When you have that increase in tourism, you have more food distribution, more consumer goods movement, air cargo, e-commerce for fulfillment, cold storage, and all the service-related warehousing, and brings us to where there is a direct connection between tourism and supporting jobs in Florida. And in 2024, I think that was 1.8 million jobs that were supported by tourism, of which, South Florida gets a huge bulk of that benefit.
Well, and from an industrial standpoint, also, a lot of these events, like the World Cup, like F1, there's a lot of need for warehouse space, right? For the logistics and the movement of all of the people and the transportation and the equipment and everything else. So there is a direct correlation between some of these really big events that are happening over and over. I mean, F1, we have a contract with them, I think, until 2041, I think.
I don't think it's that far, but it was just extended because they had 10 years.
2041.
So they went to 2030, and then, they go to 2031, and then they did another extension. So, yeah.
Yeah, 2041.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And why not? From the first day, the first iteration of F1 in Miami, they broke the record for attendance.
Yeah. In the first 3 years, they've already generated over $1 billion.
Yeah. So, incredible.
Yeah.
And what we love about it is how much there was intentionality to make sure that the local economy surrounding the stadium got to participate.
Yep.
And we've covered that, but it is incredible.
Yeah, and they think that the impact this year went up from last year. It seems to go up every year. Eventually, it's probably going to plateau, but of nearly $500 million for the 3 days that it was here. So
no, listen, without a doubt, and part of it also is we've had this conversation before. People complaining sometimes about the Ultra Music Festival, and they're obviously you experienced it coming into town, kind of like during a perfect storm, right? You have the stadium, we have everything going on, F1, and, flying in on a Saturday, you took you 30 minutes to get an Uber, which is very rare in Miami International Airport. But even with all those inconveniences, the numbers tell that, visitors in Florida, it is estimated that because of the tourism-related taxes that are generated, it saves Florida households nearly $2,000 per household annually. So, remember, we're a state without a state income tax.
Right.
This is how we really generate the revenue to take care of a lot of things. And it's great that Florida continues to attract people. And this is why also, even though we've had a Republican-controlled government in the state of Florida for a long time, that things that people don't connect with that party is the protection of wildlife, the protection of water preservation, all that stuff. Right. And it's this understanding that people come here for this, right? There's no they don't come here for the mountains, they come for the water, they come for that. And so there's been a huge amount of investment in making sure that those natural resources that are so attractive to Florida, aside from everything else that human capital has created and the culture and all those things, that they're there to be preserved. So,
and I didn't want to neglect some of of the less flashy kind of events that take place. We also had the Emerge Americas Tech Conference at the end of April at the Miami Beach Convention Center, and the economic impact of that since it was first, launched in 2014 is close to $3 billion. And to me, these types of events are extremely important because they're showing a different side. It's not so much the tourist side, it's the creativity, the entrepreneurship, I can't think of the word, but the new tech, the emerging tech, the creativity.
Yeah, all the innovation.
Thank you, that's the word I was looking for. The innovation that has helped bring a ton of startup capital and made us, it makes us more than just a tourism place, which I think we've done a really good job for years. We've always been tourist focused, and we're raising that level, right, of tourism, but now we're bringing in the other side for the people who live here year round, which is the jobs, the tech, the excitement, the startup and the venture capital.
And really how much the financial sector, as an industry is prevalent in South Florida. And they say that outside of Manhattan, this is number 2 in finance. And so I think that we're going to see more of those, events put together. I find it interesting. I was listening, Stephen Ross with the Miami Dolphins, that the football stadium will no longer be eligible for Super Bowls. We've had a lot of great Super Bowls here, right? And so over the years, they've made a lot of improvements to the stadium itself to make sure that it was football ready. In fact, part of having the awning that they built around it, to have more coverage, all that stuff was a part of that. And it was a part of having the last Super Bowl here. And so I was reading that it's not that the stadium is not ready for the Super Bowl. It's not that we don't have enough hotel rooms or any of that stuff, but they were talking about that now the Super Bowl is such an event that it's a week-long event, 2 weeks long event, and that they want to utilize all of the outdoor area for all the fan fest and all those things. Well, somehow this stadium, Hard Rock, remember, Hard Rock Stadium is a separate entity, it's a separate company, and they're an event venue. It's not only for the football team, but because they have the tennis for probably what they call the 5th Grand Slam in tennis, which is here, the Miami Open, then they also have the stuff for Formula One that basically the NFL is saying, you don't have enough space to create, this experience. I'm sure all of that is going to change. I'm sure it's a tactic to get him to invest more on outdoor areas and all that other stuff. But I mean, my goodness, when you go to that stadium, it's almost unrecognizable how and really how well they have done.
And how they change it from one use, from a concert venue to a football field to a Formula One racetrack. It's talk about logistics. That would be a really cool. We're going to have to interview somebody from Hard Rock because how they do that
and how many months in it. Because my understanding is that once the last football game is over, I mean, they start making that huge change. And it's not only that, they have to adhere to certain standards, to the asphalt of the track and all that other stuff. I mean, it's really unbelievable. Can I also tell you there's a part of the F1 race that you can watch. So you know how you have these traffic cameras that you can log in online, they're free, and you could just, if you want to see. Well, there's a traffic camera that goes around one of the corners of the race.
Oh, okay.
And somebody put it online. You could actually see that part of the race just on the traffic camera. It's actually a pretty good angle, so that's always good.
Well, and this year I wasn't here for it, obviously, because we came in on Saturday, but I read somewhere that McLaren actually did a race through Coconut Grove.
Through Coconut Grove.
It was
absolutely. And really, because they come in a week in advance. And so there were a lot of events all throughout South Florida that all the teams did, which was really, really cool to see. One of the things that happens here is through these tourism taxes, we often fund, convention center, sports facilities, infrastructure, public improvements and all that other stuff. And just connecting it to your eMerge conversation that, there's been a lot of conversation about whether we have the convention center that is really suited for a lot of these big events, so I don't know if that will continue to be part of the conversation.
Probably, most likely, especially as we become more of a convention-oriented place. Most people don't want to come for convention here June, July, August, and part of September, right? Even though that's when most conventions happen, because you tend to get cheaper rates down here than you would during high season. But going back to Emerge and, also tying it into the Visit Florida. So one of the startup showcase winners at Emerge was actually a Nigerian company. So when you start seeing that correlation, between like Africa, visitors are up, and so you start seeing that, and who knows who attended Emerge from one of those countries this year that next year is going to have an idea and want to bring it in. So
no, completely agree. And this is why we love that diving into the numbers. Even though the report is not ready, you get to see what's been happening here in locally and all throughout the country. And this is really, we are one of, really 4 markets that in Miami that have a huge reliance on tourism for convention activity, international travel, cruise traffic, which is up as well, and of course the destination branding. So if you look at Miami, Orlando, Tampa, Palm Beach, those markets are certainly very, very connected to tourism still. And I think, again, it goes back to your conversation about Emerge. We are no longer solely relying on tourism to be such a factor in our economy, still incredibly important and significant. But what I also notice is everyone in the real estate sector, especially for these big events, when you look at Art Basel, when you look at Formula One and all that stuff, is how much they are trying to attract people that are visiting to especially new developments, new projects that are coming in and all those things. So there's something powerful about that.
Well, and obviously listening to these numbers, I think, most of our listeners can infer the effect that this has on commercial real estate across the board. But it's also showing a difference in terms of the level of tourism that we've been getting is, I think, a direct correlation with the people and the money and the companies that are moving here. And Avanti Way did a report recently, and you can find it on YouTube, and it was mostly related to the housing market, but it did talk about the amount of wealth that's coming in here. And, Jess and I were talking earlier today about Dadeland and just how Dadeland has changed so much. And I think I've mentioned this before. When I first moved here 30-something years ago, there was a JCPenney's, there was a Nordstrom's, there was a Bloomies, there was a Saks. And even though Saks and Bloomies are higher end, they ended up eventually not doing well there. But now you go there, and in addition to the much more elevated restaurants that they have, Dadeland's done a beautiful job of really upping the experience for people who go there. It's also brought in a much, much higher quality retailer. You've got Gucci, you've got the fancy Swiss chocolate place, you've got Tesla in there. So that's changed, and that's a reflection of how the demographics in Miami, and even because Dadeland has always been a tourist destination in itself, especially with people from South America. And now it's just the transformation over the years is pretty impressive in terms of how that market has shifted to a much higher demographic.
For sure. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us on this short episode of Between Two Chairs. We'll be sure to update you on the Visit Florida report once it is all said and done. But definitely the trends, there's wind in our sails, as they say. And, we're looking at all the different metrics. And, remember that real estate is a demographic and labor business. And so, all these things tend to support that growth.
And I think just from what we've seen so far in 2026, it's, we should be in a very, very good place by the end of this year. I expect those numbers to go up significantly.
Absolutely. From your mouth to God's ears. Well, thank you, everybody. Say bye, Jennifer.
Bye.